But let's go ahead and bring in Steve Kyler on the Menard Studio Hotline. Steve, the publisher of BasketballInsiders.com. Steve, thanks for the time. Good to talk to you again. Let's start with the games coming up tonight, and we'll start with that Cavaliers-Bulls game. Some things that I've been looking at online over the course of the day since that game on Wednesday night. There's been some questions as to, especially with the way the game went on Wednesday night between the Bulls and the Cavs, some people asking the question of why isn't Tom Thibodeau playing Mirotic a little bit more, because they feel that maybe he's a little bit better, can draw the Cleveland defense to the perimeter a little bit more. What's your take on where Mirotic is, and is he maybe not as good as advertised?
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with him being good as a player. One, I think, Pau Gasol and Joakim Noah create better matchups, but I think a lot of people that are calling for Nico forget that he had a pretty substantial knee injury in that first series, and, they've been trying to play him where he'll fit in, but I think you're probably going to hear, when the season's over, that his knee was going to require a little more work, and, potentially he's not 100%. I think that's something you always want. And I think the one thing you've seen from Tom Thibodeau is that he's going to play his starters. He's going to play his number one guys, and he's going to play them 40, 48 minutes if they can do it. He's not a guy that likes to go deep into the bench.
Is Thibodeau, regardless of how this plays out, is he done in Chicago, even if they win a championship? Because that's the way it sounds to me that's going to be the case.
Well, championship probably, maybe not. I mean, there are a couple of things in this Tom Thibodeau situation worth knowing. One, he's got 2 years left on his deal. The Bulls have never fired someone who's had 2 years on their deal. But even though the coaching dollars are as small as they are, it's just something they've never done. The other part of it, too, is that, the relationship between Tom Thibodeau and the front office is probably as toxic as it gets in the NBA. A lot of crazy stuff between, Tom and John Paxson, and it probably means that anything short of a championship, it probably has the Bulls looking to do kind of what the Boston Celtics did with Doc Rivers, which is move him onto a team that probably makes more sense for him, get out of those final 2 years of his contract, and maybe get some level of compensation back for him. I don't think you're going to outright fire him. I think you'll probably see an Orlando Magic team or a Denver Nugget team maybe look to trade for him.
Talking to Steve Kyler, BasketballInsiders.com on the Menard Studio Hotline. It's Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3, and online, ESPNEvansville.com. Steve, what do you make of this idea that Derrick Rose hasn't been to the line for a free throw in like 3 straight games?
Well, you got to be more aggressive. The one thing is I think we've seen this in the playoffs that, some of those gimme plays, they're going to let guys play through. They don't want the quick whistle to be the reason a finals game or a championship game or, playoff game gets decided. And, I don't think that, and honestly, I don't think that Derrick has been nearly aggressive enough to be complaining about free throws. I think the other part of it is that, especially in game 2, the whistle follows energy. It really does. The whistle follows effort. The guys that are back on their heels generally don't get fouls. Guys that are, charging forward generally do. And, I think you've got to see more out of Derrick. And I think that's the big reason between game one and game 2. In game 1, you saw this flawless Derrick that was doing a lot of really good things. And in game 2, it wasn't the same guy.
On the other side of things with Cleveland, I've said since game 2 that in order for Cleveland to advance past this series and beyond, LeBron needs to play like he played in game 2 every night. He can't, as much as he's a guy that makes everybody around him better, and he's certainly not afraid to give up the ball to somebody that maybe has a better look at something. To me, if Cleveland wants to continue on in these playoffs, he's got to have the kind of games and play the way he played on Wednesday night. Do you see it the same way, or can he kind of mix and match it up a little bit?
Well, no, I think in order for the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially without a Kevin Love, you've got to have the very best of LeBron, and the very best of LeBron is an aggressive LeBron because good things happen around him. When you look at game 2, driving to the front of the rim, he's going to suck in 2, sometimes 3 defenders. That's going to leave 1 or 2 players open, or at least create an opening that causes chaos in the defense. Swing the ball around, you're going to get a higher percentage look. When LeBron is trying to be facilitator, he's letting the lesser guys, I'm not really trying to take a swipe at a Kyrie Irving or an Amon Shumpert, but he's letting the guys lower down on the totem pole, if you will, carry the team when really he should be the one that does, because you saw it. He's capable in a half of giving you 21 points. He's a crazy machine when it comes that way, and the Bulls don't really have an answer for that. So aggressive LeBron is what's going to be required for the Cavs to advance.
Without Kevin Love, as much as there was, media talk, that's what we all enjoy to do. I don't know exactly how much of the turmoil was real, but as much as, Kevin Love was noted to be unhappy there and things just trying to adjust and fit in as basically number 3 of the big 3, now they don't have him. Can Cleveland, or will Cleveland, win a title, or will they even make it to the finals without a Kevin Love?
I think they can, but it certainly gets a lot harder, the idea of the big 3. And I think most people look at Kevin Love's stats and think, well, he's not that important. But the truth of the matter is he is in a lot of ways. He was one of their better rebounders, certainly one of their best perimeter shooters. And when Kevin Love's on the floor, you have to account for him. You have to account for him all the way to the three-point line, which you do not have to do for guys like Tristan Thompson or Kendrick Perkins or any of the bigs that they're putting in there. So there is a lot of space that a Kevin Love created that wasn't necessarily offense for him as much as it was creating opportunities for others. So it gets harder because some of the other guys that you're asking to shoulder a bigger load either haven't done it or haven't proven they can do it. And so now you're really counting on LeBron to be a superhero and, Kyrie Irving to be, Mr. 25 and 5 and 25 and 6. And that's just a huge burden. It's one less guy to help shoulder the burden. And it doesn't get easier from here. You're seeing it in the Chicago series. These guys aren't afraid of the Cleveland Cavaliers, certainly not afraid of LeBron James.
Well, Kendrick Perkins hasn't played a lot for a while, but I don't remember in his earlier days when he was playing often and producing, I don't remember him being this angry. Is he? I mean, it just seems like he wants to fight all the time. He's going to cost his team, is he not?
Well, the one thing is, and this was his role in Oklahoma City, was to be the guy in the locker room, get in people's faces and setting a defensive tone and being the agitator. And while it's been a lot more publicized, and it's because what we'll call it agitation per minute stat is a lot higher because he's not on the floor as much. But Kendrick Perkins, all his career, and the funniest part about all of that, he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet. He's just a big teddy bear. He really is. But he barks, and he's going to get after it, and he's very old school that way. And, he's going to force you to react to him. And, his job is to get you rattled. His job is to move you out of position. And the best thing that could happen is for you to swing at him because you'll get thrown out, and that's his job, is to get you out of the game. So, he does his job really well. He's a real old-school player that way. But, certainly I think we're seeing more of it because we're seeing less of him. But I think if you go back and look at the last couple of years in Oklahoma City, he was doing the same thing and being that guy, the big brother, the instigator.
Steve Kyler, BasketballInsiders.com, joining us on the Menard Studio Hotline. It's Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3, and online, ESPNEvansville.com. What's the latest on Shumpert? Do you know?
Well, it was a strained groin. They're calling it a game-time decision. We'll see how that plays out as we get a little bit closer. But the one thing that, in talking to people in and around his situation, if Shump can go, you don't want a strain to turn into a tear. And it's kind of the same thing that the LA Clippers are going through with Chris Paul. You don't want it to turn into a tear. And so you've got to be a little cautious with that. And at the same time, you're going to get J.R. Smith back tonight. And that means you may not need to kind of push Shump into a situation where maybe he could do more damage. You need to be a little more limited with him, let him get a little better. But you saw it. He played through after the injury. He was sore after that, had a lot of treatment over the last 24 hours. So my guess is he'll go, but I don't know that you'll see nearly as many minutes out of him, unless it really kind of gets out of hand or really that his injury isn't as bad as maybe we've been talking about. They are keeping it very close to that.
Well, and you mentioned Chris Paul, too. There was a report that Matt Barnes has come out and said that Chris Paul was going to tell him or told him that he was playing tonight. Do you know if that's for real or what's the expectation there?
Again, same scenario with the team. The team is not really commenting on the status of Chris until game time. He's supposed to get out on the floor, do a little bit of work. He's been improving. He's been working really over the last couple of games. I think there's a couple of things that played out here, which is one, getting that first win in Houston really gave them a bumper, a little bit of a cushion, because they really competed. And I think the way that they competed in game 2, gives you the luxury of waiting. Because here's the thing, you don't want Chris Paul to come back and have a tear or really aggravate it, because if you do get through the Houston Rockets and you do advance and you're running into a Golden State Warriors team or a Memphis team, and you're going to have a Chris Paul to beat those guys. So you are weighing the present and how you're playing and what your opportunity is in front of you with also the big picture. That's the thing you have to weigh at this point in the season is, do you want to put it out there and have him gone for the rest, or do you want to give him one more game? And I think a lot of it is, how does Chris feel come game time?
Well, I think whether it's tonight or it's in Game 4, once he does come back, I would suspect you'll see it in limited minutes. How much of an impact can he have if the Rockets know that he's kind of working maybe less than 100% on a bum leg? How much impact can he have if it's just for limited minutes?
I'll set you up with that one. Ask the San Antonio Spurs. Chris Paul is Chris Paul. When he's on the floor, he's a difference maker. He's got vision, court awareness. He's got the ball on a string. His guys respond to him. He's probably not going to be the same guy defensively, but, to Chris's credit or discredit, he's not the world's best defender. I don't think that's why you have a Chris Paul out on the floor. The offense is going to run smoother. The other thing, too, and you saw this with Memphis and Mike Conley, and you'll see this tonight with J.R. Smith and potentially with Chris Paul coming back, is that, those guys that are filling in for him now get to go to the bench and become the spark plug or the extra guy off the bench. So you always get two things back when you get an injury, is you get the guy you were missing, and then the guy who's playing the backup minutes now can go play those backup minutes again. So you do tend to get a little bit better. I think the one thing with the LA Clippers, and this is kind of the elephant in the room with that team, is Blake Griffin plays a whole lot better when Chris Paul's not on the floor. And you saw it last year when Chris was injured. You saw it in this Rockets series. Blake is a beast when he's the guy. When he has to kind of be the co-guy, neither one of those guys play incredibly well. So, it'll be interesting to see how Doc manages the minutes and really tries to exploit the fact that Blake can really get anywhere he wants to go against the Houston Rockets.
Well, the thing that jumped out at me, and I could be totally wrong as well. Obviously, you're a lot deeper into the NBA than I am, but it seems that in this series, the LA Clippers are just hungrier. They seem like they want it more. I don't know if that's because they finally feel like they're getting out of the shadow of the Lakers a little bit. They've got a shot to move ahead here, but it just feels to me like they want it more.
Well, I would say the one thing that, I think the popular narrative is to point to the Lakers. Those guys in the Clippers locker room really don't care. And it's every time I try to get one of them to bite on that story, they just won't go there. But there is a truth to this. Everybody's window in the NBA is small. The chance to win a championship is often about timing. It's not necessarily about your roster. And when you look at kind of what's in front of teams in the Eastern Conference with Chicago, this will probably be as close as they can get to the NBA Finals as they've been since Jordan played there. When you look at the LA Clippers, this is probably as good a team as they're going to have in terms of where Chris is at in his career, where DeAndre Jordan is at, where Blake Griffin is at, and the fact that you've got a bench that can really contribute and play good postseason basketball. You can't give any opportunities away, and I think that's the one thing that all of these teams that are really kind of at this point, they sense that you're really 6 wins away from the NBA Finals, and that's a really hard thing to do when you think about how many teams get chewed up in the 82-game schedule. So the Clippers' motivation is much bigger than anything that's going on in their market. It's the fact that those guys aren't getting any younger, especially a lot of those guys sitting on the bench.
Talking to Steve Kyler, BasketballInsiders.com, our guest on Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3 and online, ESPNEvansville.com. Let's move on to the games coming up this weekend. That Wizard-Hawks series, now with the word is that John Wall, with the broken bones in his hands, if he doesn't come back, do the Wizards have any chance of winning this series without him?
Almost none. I just can't imagine that there's a way that they're going to be good enough. When you look at the production with John Wall on the floor versus no John Wall, they're a lottery team. They're not as productive as anybody that's not playing or is currently looking at draft picks. They fall off, and unless a Paul Pierce finds the fountain of youth on the way to Game 3 or Bradley Beal just erupts, they just don't have it. You know, John is such a huge part of what they do in all phases of the game. You know, he is the creator of a lot of their offense with his drive and kick. He's a scorer when they need him. He's a leader in the locker room and in the huddle. You know, he executes the plan exactly as they wanted. And as good as Ramon Session is as a player, he's not anywhere near the caliber of a John Wall. And that's a huge miss for them. And, you know, this is tough because John has injured that wrist before. And you're talking 5 cracked bones in his wrist. You know, in his mind, he'd love to play, and he's told people around him he wants to play, and he played right after breaking it. But, you know, you've got to start to think about the long term for John Wall's age and really what it means. But, you know, like I was saying with the other guys, you get this far in the season and you look at what's in front of you in the Eastern Conference, you want to try to go if you can. It's going to be tough for the Washington Wizards if John Wall can't go. And this is a tough injury to kind of guess what's going to happen. His camp's trying, but I don't think we'll see him play.
Well, if that's the case, then it's obviously a huge break for the Atlanta Hawks, which I still feel, and I've said this since the start of the playoffs and still believe it, it just feels like nobody is giving the Hawks a chance to come out of the East. Why do you think that is?
Well, one, I think the biggest problem is that, you know, they don't have a star. They don't have the game-changing guy. When you need a bucket, who do you throw the ball to? I mean, as good as Al Horford is and Paul Millsap and Jeff Teague and, you know, Kyle Korver can hit some threes and do all – who's the guy that can take 25 shots on that team or would take 25 shots on that team? They're so unselfish. They play as a unit. Their strength is the fact that they do trust and defer, and they swing the ball, and they play very much like the San Antonio Spurs. But the big difference in that comparison is that, you know, if the San Antonio Spurs need a bucket, they go to Tim Duncan and can get one, or Tony Parker and can get one, or Kawhi Leonard and can get one. They don't have that guy. And, you know, they're one guy short, and that's where you saw, you know, being exploited by the Washington Wizards, why it went, you know, much further than it needed to with the Brooklyn Nets. They're not quite the team they were in the regular season, where the schedule really favored team play, where in the postseason stars prevail.
Looking at that Grizzlies-Warriors series, I think, myself included, I've said from the get-go the Warriors will be in the NBA Finals coming out of the West. But with that said, and the way Mike Conley lit a fire under that Grizzlies team the other night, now it goes back to Memphis. Should Golden State be maybe a little bit more concerned about this series than they might have been going into it?
Sure. But, you know, in terms of full disclosure, I think I'm the only national writer that took the Memphis Grizzlies in 7. I didn't have the Golden State Warriors advancing. I've been on this Memphis Grizzlies bandwagon all year long. I'm not getting off now. This team plays incredibly well as a unit. They do what Golden State struggles with, and that is they can really play in the low post. You've got 2 phenomenal big men in Marc Gasol and Zach Randolph. They really understand how to run and create space for themselves. And the Golden State Warriors don't have an answer for that. And in Game 1, really it was, you saw it, you know, they could get anything they wanted in the low post. But then you had guys like Nick Kalathis. You know, 2 years ago, Nick Kalathis was playing in Greece. You know, you have Beno Udrih, who's been a career backup. These aren't guys that are going to be able to hang with a Steph Curry and a Klay Thompson and a Sean Livingston, where you put a Mike Conley on the floor, and now there aren't as many turnovers. The playbook is being executed more precisely, and the bigger part is that Mike can stay with a Steph Curry. You know, he understands how to read those screens, whether to go over or go under, and he can stay in front of Steph, and he can challenge a little bit. Look, nobody takes the ball out of Steph Curry's hands, and Steph's going to get some points, but Mike's a guy that can frustrate that and break up the rhythm and the routine of it. And more importantly, there were just so many plays in Game 1 that were about just sloppy play and turnovers. If you turn the ball over in the Golden State Warriors, they're going to torture you. They're going to get 2 or 3 almost every possession, you know, where you see Mike Conley being a factor as more control, more patience, and the score's lower. And if the Memphis Grizzlies can keep this thing in the 90s, and you're going into Memphis, which they call the grindhouse, it's going to be tough going for Golden State unless they can figure out a way to slow down the big fellas.
So if I understand you correctly, can we put you down for Memphis coming out of the West?
Absolutely. I'm not backing off. I said Memphis in 7. I'm sticking with it. I saw what I needed. Look, they put the game on Golden State's home floor. 2 other teams had done that all year. So, they did what they needed to do. They swung momentum in Memphis' favor, and you got Mike Conley on the floor. Now, I don't think you'll see superhero Mike like you did in Game 2, and I also don't think Steph Curry is going to shoot as bad as he did in Game 2, but it's a contest now. And, I think the one thing is we'll see how Golden State responds. Now, the Memphis Grizzlies know they can compete. They know they can win, and they get to do that coming into their building. Now the Golden State Warriors have to figure out how to respond and be challenged a little bit. So that's why we love the playoffs. It doesn't always go as scripted.
What would be a better matchup if they make it past Golden State? Who's a better matchup for them to advance to the NBA Finals? The Rockets or the Clippers?
I would probably say the Clippers, and this is for selfish reasons. They don't like each other. They really don't. The Memphis Grizzlies and the Clippers have a long-going feud. Blake Griffin and Zach Randolph get into it every time they play. It'll be excellent television. It'll be very competitive games. But I'll tell you, honestly, either way, I don't think the Houston Rockets can beat the Memphis Grizzlies in a 7-game series. The LA Clippers could probably take this thing the distance in terms of going 7 games, but we don't know what Chris Paul's really going to be down the stretch, and I think that would be the big X factor. Look, the Clippers don't advance without Chris Paul. They might be able to get past Houston without Chris Paul, but they don't get through Memphis, and they certainly don't get through Golden State without Chris Paul.
Who do you like out of the East then?
I'm still on Chicago, and, I think Chicago is the better team when you look at the entire roster, when you look at the institutional knowledge of those guys being together, trusting and playing well, and the system that they run and the trust that they have in each other and their coach. You still have a very young team in the Cleveland Cavaliers. While you've got a Mike Miller and a James Jones, you do have a Tristan Thompson and a Kyrie Irving that really, they're doing their very best. But I think when we start to get to really grind it out games, I just don't know what we're going to see out of the Cavaliers. While they did win some games, after making some trades, they weren't necessarily world beaters, definitely not world beaters on the defensive end. And if Chicago can find their way, and be consistent on a night-to-night basis, they're the better basketball team. So I'm going to take Chicago because I don't, like you guys, I'm not believing in Atlanta. As much as that team has done, they're still one more player away. I think this is Chicago's year.
That's Steve Kyler, publisher, BasketballInsiders.com. You can find him on Twitter at Steve Kyler NBA. Great stuff, Steve. We appreciate the time. Enjoy the games this weekend.
Anytime, fellas.